The envelope was thick, expensive, and utterly damning. Liam Black's world, a world built on billions and an unbreakable will, shattered into a million silent, screaming pieces right there in his penthouse office. The Manhattan skyline glittered behind him, a kingdom he owned, but he saw none of it. His eyes were locked on the black and white photo in his hand. It was an ultrasound image, a grainy, beautiful, impossible little bean of a baby. And the name typed neatly next to surrogate mother was one he knew, one he had trusted, Elara Vance. His breath hitched, a sharp, painful sound in the vast, silent room. He had hired her because she was pure, untroubled, simple, a virgin from some quiet little town, chosen specifically to avoid complications, to be a clean, emotionless vessel. She had signed the contract. She had taken his money. She had promised no attachments, no claims, no mess. This was the biggest mess of all. His lawyer, a shark named Arthur, stood before the massive oak desk, his face a mask of grim satisfaction. The private investigator confirmed it this morning. She's 19 weeks along. She never had the embryo transfer, Liam. She never went to the clinic that day. She's pregnant the old-fashioned way. Liam's knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the desk. The old-fashioned way. The words were a physical blow. It meant she had lied. It meant she had betrayed him in the most intimate, devastating way possible. But who with? The doorman? The driver? Some secret lover she'd hidden while playing the part of the innocent, perfect surrogate? Arthur placed another document on the desk. It was a legal filing. She's petitioning for parental rights. She's claiming the child is yours by natural means and is seeking child support, along with a formal recognition of paternity. The air left Liam's lungs. His, by natural means, the memory, hazy with the expensive whiskey he'd consumed that one terrible night 6 months ago, slammed into him. The gala, the crushing loneliness that always followed public events. Finding Elara crying in the library of his estate, homesick and overwhelmed. His own stupid, misplaced comfort. A single, blurry, unforgivable moment of weakness he had buried deep, convinced it was a dream, a phantom. It wasn't a dream, and she had planned this. She had to have planned this. This quiet, wide-eyed girl had seen a crack in his armor and had driven a stake right through his heart. "Get out," Liam whispered, his voice dangerously low. Arthur hesitated. "Liam, we need to strategize. We can fight this. We can bury her in legal." I said, "Get out." The roar tore from his throat, raw and primal. He swept his arm across the desk, sending a crystal decanter and a century-old globe crashing to the marble floor. Arthur fled. Alone, Liam stared at the ultrasound picture. A child. His child. Growing inside the one woman he had deemed safe, the one woman he had thought was too simple to be dangerous. He had built an empire to feel in control, to never be at the mercy of anyone ever again. And now, a girl from nowhere had taken that control and smashed it with a single piece of paper. She had changed everything. And as the cold, familiar fury began to burn away the shock, Liam Black made a promise to himself. Elara Vance would regret the day she ever decided to play games with a billionaire. Before we dive in, take a moment to drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories reach across the globe. Hit subscribe now. A new one's coming tomorrow, so don't miss it. Let's continue. For months earlier, Elara Vance had walked into the lion's den for the first time. Her heart was a frantic bird beating against her ribs. The elevator was made of glass, and as it soared up the side of the Black Tower, the city of New York fell away beneath her, becoming a toy model of itself. She clutched the strap of her cheap, worn-out bag. This was it, her one chance to save her family. The surrogate fee Mr. Black was offering was more money than her parents had seen in their entire lives. The elevator doors slid open into a room that wasn't a room. It was a realm. The ceiling was so high it felt like a sky. The floor was a mirror of polished stone. A severe-looking woman in a sharp black suit greeted her without a smile. "Mr. Black will see you now." Elara followed her, her sensible shoes squeaking on the floor. They entered an office that made the reception area look small. And behind a desk the size of her first apartment sat Liam Black. He wasn't just a man, he was a force. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe in his mid-30s, with dark hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He wasn't looking at her, but at a tablet, his brow furrowed. He radiated a power so intense it felt like the air was thinner around him. "Sit," he said, without glancing up. She sat in the cold leather chair opposite him, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. She tried not to stare, but she couldn't help it. This was the man who held her future in his hands. He finally looked up, and his gaze was like a physical weight. It scanned her from head to toe, clinical, detached. She felt like a specimen. "Elara Vance," he stated. His voice was deep, cool. 21. No sexual history. No genetic red flags. Excellent physical health. "You need the money." It wasn't a question. It was a fact laid bare on his desk. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "Why?" he asked, leaning back, finally giving her his full attention. "People don't usually offer to carry a stranger's child for fun. What's so important?" Elara's throat felt tight. "My father. He needs a surgery. And ongoing care. His insurance. It's not enough. We're going to lose our house." She hated the tremor in her voice. She hated that she had to lay her family's poverty out for this man who probably spent more on a single suit than her father's annual salary. Liam Black watched her, his expression unreadable. She could see the calculations going on behind his eyes, weighing her desperation, assessing her usefulness. "I am not looking for a mother for my child," he said, each word precise and sharp. "I am looking for a host, a safe, temporary, and most importantly, dispassionate environment for my heir. The contract is explicit. You will live at my estate under medical supervision. You will follow every directive from my doctor and my staff. After the birth, you will relinquish all parental rights, take the final payment, and you will disappear. There will be no contact. Ever. Do you understand the terms?" Elara nodded, her heart aching with a strange, sudden sorrow. "A host, not a mother. I understand." He picked up a pen, a sleek silver object that probably cost more than her car. "The lawyers have the paperwork. You'll be moved in tomorrow." He looked back at his tablet, the dismissal absolute. "Don't make me regret this, Miss Vance." The meeting was over. She was let out, the door closing behind her with a soft, final click. She had gotten what she wanted. The money was hers. Her family was saved. So why did she feel like she had just sold a piece of her soul to the most terrifying man she had ever met? As she descended in the glass elevator, the city rushing up to meet her, one thought echoed in her mind. He's so alone. It was a ridiculous thought. A billionaire, surrounded by people, alone? But she had felt it. A deep, chilling isolation that lived in the very walls of his perfect, silent office. She shook her head, trying to clear it. It didn't matter. She had a job to do. She would be the perfect host. She would follow the rules. She would take the money and walk away. She had to, because the one rule she could never, ever break was already written in the contract. No attachments. But as she stepped out onto the busy New York street, the memory of his stormy, lonely eyes stayed with her, and a tiny, treacherous part of her wondered if some rules were made to be broken. The estate wasn't a home. It was a fortress of glass and steel, perched on a cliff overlooking the restless Atlantic. They called it Solitude, a name Elara found bitterly perfect. Her new world was a beautiful, silent prison. Her room was a suite larger than her entire house back in Ohio, decorated in shades of white and gray. It was stunning and utterly soulless. A team of staff, a nutritionist, a personal trainer, a taciturn housekeeper named Mrs. Davies, orbited her, their movements precise and their smiles practiced. They were there to maintain the vessel. Weeks bled into a monotony of measured meals, vitamin injections, and monitored walks along the manicured cliff paths. The only break in the routine was the doctor's visits, which were cold, clinical affairs in a state-of-the-art medical room on the lower level. They were preparing her body for the embryo transfer, a procedure that felt both terrifyingly close and impossibly distant. She never saw Liam Black. He was a ghost in his own home. She'd sometimes catch a glimpse of his black car speeding down the long driveway, or see the lights on in his private wing of the house, a part of the estate she was strictly forbidden from entering. He was a shadow, a rumor of power. She'd hear his name whispered by the staff, their voices filled with a mixture of fear and reverence. It was during one of her lonely walks that she found the walled garden. It was hidden behind a hedge, its iron gate slightly ajar. Unlike the rest of the perfectly controlled grounds, this garden was wild. Roses grew in tangled, fragrant masses, and herbs she recognized from her grandmother's kitchen sprouted between cracks in the flagstones. Felt alive, real. She started visiting every day. It became her secret. She'd sit on a sun-warmed stone bench and close her eyes, pretending the salt on the air was from Lake Erie, not the ocean, and that the hum was from cicadas, not the distant security drones. One afternoon, she was on her knees, carefully pulling weeds from around a stubborn lavender bush, her hands buried in the rich, dark soil. The feeling was so grounding, so normal, that for a moment, she forgot where she was. "What are you doing?" The voice, cold and sharp, cut through the peace. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She turned slowly. Liam Black stood at the garden gate, silhouetted against the setting sun. He was dressed in a dark, tailored suit, but his tie was loose, and he held a crystal glass of amber liquid. He looked tired. The controlled mask he wore in his office was gone, replaced by a raw, weary tension. I'm sorry," Elara stammered, scrambling to her feet and brushing the dirt from her simple cotton dress. "The gate was open. I liked it in here." He didn't reply. His stormy eyes scanned the garden, then landed on her dirty hands. A flicker of something, disgust, curiosity, crossed his face. "This was my mother's garden," he said, his voice quieter now, almost conversational. It was more unsettling than his anger. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It feels loved." He let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "Loved? She died when I was 12. Nothing here has been loved since." The confession hung in the air, stark and painful. Elara didn't know what to say. The mighty Liam Black, sharing a childhood memory? It didn't make sense. He took a step into the garden, his expensive shoes crushing a sprig of thyme, releasing its scent into the evening air. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could smell the sharp, clean scent of his cologne mixed with the whiskey. "They tell me you are perfectly healthy, that you are ideal." He said the word ideal as if it were a clinical term. "Are you ready for the procedure?" The question felt like a bucket of ice water. This was why she was here. Not to garden, not to chat, to be a host. "Yes, sir," she said, her eyes dropping to the ground. He was silent for a long moment, just watching her. She could feel his gaze like a physical touch. "You're afraid of me," he observed. It wasn't a question. She forced herself to look up, to meet his eyes. They were darker up close, full of a history of pain she couldn't even imagine. "You hold all the power here, Mr. Black. My family's future is in your hands." "Yes, that's frightening." Something shifted in his expression. The weariness seemed to deepen. For a single, breathtaking second, he looked almost human. "Power," he repeated softly, almost to himself. He looked around the wild, untamed garden, a relic of a dead woman in his perfect, controlled world. "It's a gilded cage, Miss Vance. Don't ever be fooled into wanting it." Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the moment was over. His face hardened, the mask sliding back into place. "The transfer is scheduled for next Thursday. Do not be late." He turned and walked out of the garden without a backward glance, leaving her alone with the scent of crushed thyme and the echo of his words. A gilded cage. She looked down at her dirty hands, at the living earth under her fingernails. He was wrong. Her cage might be gilded, but it was still a cage. His, however, was one he had built for himself, brick by billion-dollar brick. And for the first time, she felt a pang of something dangerous for Liam Black. It wasn't fear. It was pity. The night of the gala was a whirlwind of forced smiles and glittering lies. Liam moved through the crowd in his own ballroom, shaking hands, making promises, his face a pleasant mask. This was the part he hated most. The noise, the fake laughter, the people who wanted a piece of him. He saw Elara across the room. His staff had dressed her for the event. A simple but elegant navy gown that made her look young and painfully out of place. She was standing by a potted palm, trying to look invisible. A wave of irritation washed over him. Why had he agreed to let her come? It was a charity event for a children's hospital, and his PR team had insisted it would be good optics for the surrogate to be seen, to make the whole transaction seem more humane. Humane. The word was a joke. He watched as an older, lecherous business associate of his, Roger Hammond, sidled up to her. He saw the way Elara's posture stiffened, the polite, panicked smile she gave him as Hammond leaned in too close, his hand lingering on her arm. A hot, possessive anger flared in Liam's chest. She was his asset, his responsibility, no one else's. He excused himself from a conversation and cut through the crowd, his presence causing people to instinctively part. He arrived just as Hammond was laughing at something, his grip still on Elara's arm. Roger. Liam's voice was a low, pleasant threat. I need to borrow Miss Vance. The doctor needs a word. Hammond's smile faltered. Of course, Liam. Of course. He released Elara's arm as if it were on fire. Liam didn't look at Hammond. He took Elara's elbow, his touch firm but not rough, and guided her away from the crowd, through a side door, and into the blessed quiet of his private library. The moment the door closed, the silence was deafening. She was trembling. I'm sorry, she whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I didn't know what to say to him. You don't have to say anything to men like that, Liam said, his voice rough. He let go of her arm and walked to the drinks cabinet, pouring himself 2 fingers of whiskey, his hands uncharacteristically unsteady. The sight of her, so vulnerable, so pure, in the middle of all that greed, had shaken him. They're vultures. They see something gentle and they want to tear it apart. He downed the whiskey, the liquid burning a path down his throat. He could feel her eyes on him. Why do you do it then? She asked softly. If you hate it so much? He turned to look at her. She was standing in the middle of the vast, book-lined room, looking small and lost and beautiful. The anger and the whiskey and the crushing loneliness of the night converged into a single, reckless impulse. Because it's the cage, he said, his voice low. You play the game or the game destroys you. My father taught me that. Before he destroyed himself. He saw the genuine compassion in her eyes then, and it was his undoing. No one had looked at him with compassion in years, only with fear or greed. He didn't remember crossing the room. One moment he was by the cabinet, the next he was standing right in front of her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her green eyes. The air crackled between them. You shouldn't look at me like that, he whispered, his breath ghosting across her face. Like what? Her voice was barely a breath. Like you understand. His hand came up, almost of its own volition, and his fingers brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. Her skin was impossibly soft. She flinched, but she didn't pull away. She just stared up at him, her lips slightly parted. It was a mistake. A catastrophic, irreversible mistake. He leaned in, and the world, for one blinding second, fell away. Elara stood frozen long after he had stormed out of the library, his own actions seeming to horrify him more than they did her. Her cheek still burned where his fingers had touched her. Her lips still tingled from the shocking, brief, and devastatingly gentle pressure of his. It had lasted only a second before he'd pulled away as if electrocuted, his face a mask of self-loathing. He'd muttered a curt, "This never happened," and left her there, her heart pounding, her world turned upside down. She stumbled back to her room, the memory of the kiss playing over and over in her mind. It was wrong. It was a violation of the contract, of every boundary. He was her employer. He held all the power. But in that single stolen moment, he hadn't felt powerful. He had felt as lost as she was. The next morning, a different kind of shock arrived. Mrs. Davies came to her room, her face as impassive as ever. "The embryo transfer has been postponed indefinitely, Miss Vance. Mr. Black has been called away on urgent business." Elara's stomach dropped. Postponed? Was this because of the kiss? Was he firing her? Sending her away? But the staff continued their routines. Her meals were served. Her walks were monitored. Everything was the same, yet everything was different. Liam Black was gone, and the silence of the estate became absolute. Weeks passed. Then, a new, terrifying reality began to dawn on her. The nausea that wasn't just from anxiety. The fatigue that was deeper than loneliness. The missed cycle, with a dread that turned her blood to ice. She locked herself in her bathroom and opened the small, secret pregnancy test she'd asked a sympathetic maid to buy for her. The 2 pink lines appeared instantly. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her face pale, her hands shaking. It wasn't the doctor's embryo. It was from that one forbidden night in the library. She was pregnant with Liam Black's child. And he had no idea. The contract was null and void. She had broken the most fundamental rule. When he found out, he would destroy her. He would take the baby and cast her out, and her family would be ruined. A desperate, wild plan began to form in her mind. It was wrong. It was a lie. But it was the only way to survive. She would hide it. She would pretend the embryo transfer had worked. She would pretend this was the child he had paid for. She would play her part until the very end. It was her only chance. She cleaned up the evidence, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was no longer just a surrogate. She was a liar, living on borrowed time in a gilded cage, guarding a secret that could shatter a billionaire's world. And hers along with it. The first trimester was a special kind of hell. Morning sickness clawed at her throat every day, a constant, nauseating reminder of the secret growing inside her. She hid it as best she could, claiming a sensitive stomach, pushing food around her plate when Mrs. Davies was watching. Every twinge of fatigue, every wave of dizziness, was a potential betrayer. Dr. Evans, the cold, efficient physician, conducted the first official pregnancy test at the estate. Elara sat in the sterile medical room, her palms slick with sweat, as she waited for the results she already knew. When he turned to her with a curt nod and said, "Congratulations, you're pregnant," the words felt like a sentence. "The embryo took," the doctor continued, making a note on his chart. "We'll schedule the first ultrasound in a few weeks to confirm viability." Viability. The word was so cold. Her baby, the result of a moment of shocking human connection, was now a medical milestone. She was moved to a different, even more luxurious suite, one with better air filtration and softer lighting. The surveillance, she was sure, intensified. She was never alone for long. A walk in the garden was always observed from a distance by a security guard. Her internet access was restricted to a handful of pre-approved, mind-numbing sites. She was a prized animal in a pampered zoo. Liam returned to the estate a month later. His absence had been a dark cloud, but his return was a thunderstorm. He was colder, more remote than ever. He summoned her to his office one afternoon. She stood before his desk, just as she had the first day, but everything was different now. She was different. She was carrying his child, his real child, and he had no idea. "The doctor informs me the procedure was a success," he said, not looking up from a financial report. He spoke as if discussing a successful business merger. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He finally glanced up, his gaze impersonal, sweeping over her. "You look pale. Is the staff providing adequate care?" "They're very attentive," she managed to say. His eyes felt like they could see right through her, right to the secret nestled in her womb. Did he remember the kiss? Did it haunt his dreams the way it haunted hers? Good. See that it continues. Your only job now is to remain healthy. He looked back down at his papers. That will be all. Dismissed. She was a successfully impregnated host, and her purpose was served. The dismissal should have stung, but all she felt was a wave of relief. He didn't suspect a thing. The lie was taking root. The first ultrasound was the most terrifying moment of her life. She lay on the examination table in the estate's medical wing, the cold gel on her stomach, while Dr. Evans moved the wand. Liam was there, standing stiffly by the door, his arms crossed. He had come, not out of excitement, she was sure, but to ensure his investment was progressing as planned. The room was silent except for the soft whir of the machine. Then, a rapid, whooshing sound filled the air. Thump thump, thump thump, thump thump. It was the most beautiful, most terrifying sound she had ever heard. Her baby's heartbeat. Dr. Evans pointed to the grainy, black and white screen. There, you can see the gestational sac and the fetal pole. Everything looks perfectly on schedule for 8 weeks. Elara's eyes were glued to the flickering little blob on the screen. Her child. Their child. A love so fierce and immediate flooded her that it stole her breath. This wasn't just a contract. This was a part of her. She risked a glance at Liam. He was staring at the screen, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he gave a single, sharp nod. Good. That was it. One word. He turned and left the room without another glance, the door closing softly behind him. The doctor printed out the image and handed it to her. For your records, he said blandly. She held the small, glossy square in her trembling hands, the proof of her lie, the evidence of her miracle. She tucked it into the pages of a book in her room. A secret treasure, a hidden shame. As the weeks turned into months, her body began to change. Her waist thickened. A small, firm bump appeared low on her abdomen. The reality of the pregnancy became impossible to ignore, both for her and for the staff. Their clinical detachment began to be peppered with small, almost human gestures. The cook started making her ginger tea for the nausea without being asked. The young maid, Sophie, who had bought the test for her, would sometimes sneak her an extra blanket. It was Sophie who broke the uneasy peace. It was a rainy afternoon, and Elara was in the library, trying to read but mostly just staring out at the storm-lashed ocean. Sophie was dusting nearby. "You're showing, miss?" Sophie said softly, her voice hesitant. Elara's hand instinctively flew to her stomach. She forced a smile. "I suppose I am." Sophie moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's just, my sister, she's had 2 babies. She was much bigger by 4 months. You're so small." A bolt of pure fear shot through Elara. She was 19 weeks along. She should be bigger. But according to the official records, she was only 16 weeks. The lie was creating a discrepancy, a dangerous one. "It's my first," Elara said quickly, her heart hammering. "And I was very thin to start with. The doctor says everything is fine." Sophie nodded, but a flicker of doubt remained in her eyes. "Of course, Mississippi. I'm sure you're right." She finished her dusting and left the room, leaving Elara in a cold sweat. The web of her lies was growing more complex, and she wasn't the only one trapped in it. She was starting to see the cracks. It was only a matter of time before someone else saw them, too. The confrontation came from an unexpected direction. Mrs. Davies. The stern housekeeper cornered her in her suite a few days later. "Miss Vance, a matter has come to my attention." Elara's blood ran cold. "Yes, Mrs. Davies? The staff has noted your modest progression. Furthermore, your dietary preferences have been unusual from the very beginning, even before the official confirmation of pregnancy." Mrs. Davies's eyes were like chips of flint. "Dr. Evans's records are, of course, impeccable, but the physical evidence is curious." Elara felt the room tilt. This was it. She was caught. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. What could she say? Mrs. Davies took a step closer. "I have served Mr. Black for 20 years. I am loyal to him and to the truth. I suggest, for your sake, that the truth Mr. Black believes and the truth your body tells are the same thing." Do I make myself clear? It wasn't kindness in the woman's voice. It was a threat, a warning. She knew, or at least she suspected, that the timeline was wrong. But her loyalty was to Liam, not to the facts. She would turn a blind eye, as long as Elara's secret didn't threaten the stability of his world. The message was clear. Keep your head down. Don't cause a scene. Don't let the lie become a problem. Trembling, Elara could only nod. Mrs. Davies gave a curt nod in return. Very good. I will inform the staff that your petite frame is simply a genetic trait. See that it remains the only topic of discussion. She left, and Elara sank onto the bed, her legs too weak to hold her. She wasn't safe. She would never be safe here. She was living on borrowed time, her fate held in the hands of a cold billionaire and his suspicious staff. She placed a hand on her stomach, where a tiny, fluttering sensation had just begun. The first, delicate movements of her baby. I'm sorry, she thought, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I'm so sorry. I'll protect you. Promise. But as she sat in her beautiful, silent prison, she had no idea how she could possibly keep that promise. The walls were closing in, and the father of her child was the greatest threat of all. The first flutter, a sensation like a butterfly brushing the inside of her skin, made Elara gasp aloud. She was in the walled garden, the one place that still felt like hers. It was quick and subtle, but it was real. Her baby was saying hello. A sob caught in her throat, a tangled mess of joy and terror. This was happening. The secret was no longer just a secret. It was a living, moving being with a will of its own. She pressed her hand against the small, firm curve of her belly, waiting, hoping to feel it again. The connection was so profound it stole her breath. This was her child, not a contractual obligation. Hers, and his. The thought of Liam was a cold splash of reality. He was due back from a week-long business trip in Tokyo tonight. The estate, which had breathed a sigh of relief in his absence, was now taut with the expectation of his return. Mrs. Davies had overseen a frantic deep cleaning, and the chef was preparing his favorite meal, a rare steak seared precisely with a red wine reduction. The contrast between the celebration of his return and the silent, lonely reality of her pregnancy was a chasm she couldn't cross. She had to be more careful than ever. The baby's movements were a ticking clock. Soon they would be strong enough for others to feel. Strong enough for a hand placed on her stomach, by a doctor or, God forbid, by him, to feel the undeniable proof of a life that was further along than it should be. That night, she heard the low purr of his car on the gravel drive. Her heart leapt into her throat, and the baby, as if sensing her spike of anxiety, gave a firm, rolling kick. She stood in the center of her room, frozen, listening to the sounds of his arrival, the opening of the heavy front door, his low, curt voice greeting Mrs. Davies, the firm tread of his footsteps echoing through the marble halls as he retreated to his wing. He didn't summon her. He didn't even acknowledge her existence. The relief was so potent it made her knees weak. The next day, however, the summons came. Not to his office, but to the sunroom, a bright, glass-walled space overlooking the ocean. It was an unusual location, less formal, and that made her more nervous than the cold formality of his office. He was standing by the window, silhouetted against the morning light, a cup of black coffee in his hand. He was dressed casually in dark trousers and a simple white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. It was the most unguarded she had ever seen him, and it was dangerously disarming. "Elara," he said, not turning around. "Sit." She sat on the edge of a plush white sofa, her hands folded tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. "How are you progressing?" he asked. The question was clinical, but the setting made it feel strangely intimate. "Fine, thank you, Mr. Black. The doctor says everything is normal." The lie was becoming easier, a well-rehearsed script. He finally turned to face her. His eyes, those stormy, perceptive eyes, scanned her. They lingered on her face, then drifted down, pausing for a fraction of a second on her stomach, which was visibly rounded beneath her soft, knitted dress. "You're still very small," he observed, his tone neutral. "The doctor says it's normal for a first pregnancy," she parroted. her voice a little too high, especially with my frame. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving her. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. She could feel the weight of her secret pushing down on her, a physical pressure. "Are you comfortable here?" he asked suddenly. The question was so unexpected it threw her completely off balance. "Comfortable?" she repeated stupidly. "This estate, the staff, the isolation." He gestured vaguely with his cup. "It can be oppressive." Was this a trick? A test? She searched his face for any sign of mockery or malice, but she saw only a weary curiosity. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes more pronounced. "It's very beautiful," she said carefully, choosing her words like stepping on stones across a treacherous river. "It's quiet." A ghost of a smile, bitter and fleeting, touched his lips. "Quiet, yes." He looked out at the ocean again. "My mother hated the quiet. She filled this house with music, with laughter." He paused, and the memory seemed to pain him. After she was gone, the silence moved in. "I've never been able to get rid of it." Elara's heart ached for him. In that moment, he wasn't the ruthless billionaire. He was just a boy who had lost his mother, living in a museum of his own grief. The urge to reach out, to offer some small comfort, was overwhelming. But she couldn't. The gulf between them was too wide, and her lie was a minefield in the middle of it. "The garden isn't quiet," she said softly. "The bees are always buzzing, and the wind in the roses, it sounds like whispering." He turned his head, his gaze sharpening on her. He looked surprised, as if she had just revealed a secret he thought only he knew. "You still go there?" "It's the only place that feels alive." Their eyes met, and for a single, heart-stopping moment the mask slipped. She saw the lonely man. He saw the gentle girl who noticed the bees. The air crackled with the unspoken memory of the library, with the terrifying, fragile connection they had forged there. Then his expression shuttered closed. The billionaire was back. "Don't overexert yourself. The garden path can be uneven." The dismissal was clear. The moment of vulnerability was over. She stood, her legs unsteady. "Of course. Thank you, Mr. Black." She fled the sunroom, her heart pounding. That had been too close. Far too close. He was perceptive, and she was a terrible liar. Every interaction with him was a high-wire act over a pit of ruin. Back in the safety of her suite, she leaned against the door, trying to calm her racing pulse. The baby kicked again, a strong, insistent thump. "He would have loved you," she thought, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. "If things were different, if I were different, if this were real." But it wasn't real. It was a transaction she had corrupted. And the more she saw of the man behind the money, the more the weight of her deception threatened to crush her. She had to get out. The thought, which had been a faint, desperate whisper, was now a clear, resolute decision. She couldn't have this baby here under his roof living this lie. He would find out. It was inevitable. And when he did, his cold fury would be 1,000 times worse than any kindness he had just shown. She would take the money from the first payment, which was sitting in a bank account she couldn't quite access from the estate's firewalled computers, and she would run. She would find a way. For her baby. For herself. But as she looked around the beautiful, luxurious prison, she knew escaping a man like Liam Black would be the most dangerous thing she had ever done. He owned everything, including the very air she breathed. How could she possibly run from a man who owned the world? The plan was a fragile, half-formed thing, built on desperation and guesswork. It lived in the quiet, terrified corners of Elara's mind, taking shape during her sleepless nights. She needed money, a phone, and a moment of true, unobserved freedom. So far, she had none of those things. Her world had shrunk to the size of a gilded atom. Mrs. Davies's watchful eye was a constant presence. The security cameras, tiny dark lenses tucked into the ornate molding of the ceilings, seemed to follow her. She was a bird in a cage, and the door was not just locked. It was being guarded. The only place the cameras couldn't see was the very center of the walled garden. hidden by the overgrown canopy of a weeping willow tree. It was there, on a cool afternoon, that she found her first real ally. She was sitting on her usual bench, a book open but unread on her lap, her hand resting on her stomach. The baby was active today, a series of rolls and kicks that made her wince and smile at the same time. She was so absorbed she didn't hear the soft footsteps on the flagstones. "May I join you?" She jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. It was Sophie, the young maid, holding a small tray with a glass of water. Her face was kind, her eyes curious. "Of course," Elara said, her voice a little breathless. She subtly shifted her book to cover her stomach. Sophie set the tray down and sat beside her, not speaking for a moment. They listened to the buzz of the bees and the distant crash of the waves. "It's a good spot, this," Sophie said softly. "Hidden." Elara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Sophie's gaze dropped to Elara's stomach, then flicked back up to her face. "My sister," she said. "The quickening is the best part. Before it gets uncomfortable. When it just feels like magic." Elara froze. The word quickening was an old-fashioned term for the first fetal movements. It was a word a medical report would never use. It was a word a sister who had babies would use. Sophie leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She was much bigger than you, Mississippi. By 5 months, she was waddling." Her eyes were earnest, and there was no malice in them, only understanding. She said her babies were always most active in the evening, just when Mr. Black is usually working in his study. The meaning behind the words was as clear as a bell. Sophie knew. She knew the baby was further along. She knew the official timeline was a lie, and she was telling Elara that she was safe. Tears pricked at Elara's eyes. She was so tired of being alone. "Sophie," she began, her voice cracking. "You're not the first, miss," Sophie whispered, her eyes darting towards the garden gate to ensure they were alone. "Not the first girl he's brought here. The others, it was all clinical. Cold. In and out. But you're different. He looks at you differently." A cold dread mixed with a strange, unwelcome thrill. "What do you mean?" "He asks Mrs. Davies about you. Not about the pregnancy. About you. What you read. If you've been walking in the garden. If you're happy." Sophie shook her head. "He's never done that before." Elara's mind raced. This changed everything. It made everything more dangerous. If he was paying that much attention, her lie was even more fragile. "Sophie, I need help," Elara whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I can't stay here." Sophie's face grew solemn. She nodded slowly. "I thought you might say that." She glanced around once more, then reached into the pocket of her maid's uniform and pulled out a cheap, prepaid cell phone. It was wrapped in a simple napkin. "It's not much," Sophie whispered, pressing it into Elara's hand. "It can only call and text. No internet. But it's a number no one knows. My cousin got it. The money, that's harder. The accounts are all monitored." Elara clutched the phone like a lifeline. It was heavy and plastic, the most beautiful thing she had ever held. "Thank you," she breathed, tears finally spilling over. "Thank you, Sophie." "Don't thank me yet," Sophie said, her face grim. "He's having a business dinner here tomorrow night. A big one. The staff will be run off our feet. It will be chaotic. That might be your only chance." "A chance for what?" "To get to his office," Sophie said, her voice barely audible. "His private home office. Mrs. Davies says he keeps a petty cash box in his bottom drawer. For tips and things. It's always full. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough to get you started." Elara's blood ran cold. Break into Liam Black's office? It was suicide. "I can't. The cameras. The alarms. The cameras in the West Hall will be offline for 2 hours for a system upgrade tomorrow starting at 8, Sophie said, her words quick and urgent. "I heard the security chief telling Mrs. Davies. The dinner starts at 7:30. He'll be occupied for hours. It's the only window." It was a crazy, reckless plan. A plan born of desperation. But it was a plan. Sophie stood up abruptly, smoothing her apron. I have to go. Remember, tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, the West Hall. She gave Elara one last, long look. Be careful, Mississippi. Then she was gone, leaving Elara alone with the buzzing bees, the fluttering baby, and a cheap, prepaid phone that felt like a loaded gun in her hand. The following evening, the estate was transformed. The quiet fortress became a hub of muted activity. Caterers in crisp uniforms flowed in and out of the kitchen. The sound of a string quartet tuning up drifted from the grand ballroom. The air smelled of expensive perfume and seared scallops. From her room, Elara watched the long, black cars disgorge their powerful, glittering passengers. She saw Liam among them, a king greeting his court. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, his smile a polished, charming weapon. He looked every inch the untouchable billionaire. He was the man who owned her, the man she was about to steal from. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. The prepaid phone was hidden under her mattress. The plan was a tangled mess in her head. At 8 o'clock, she cracked open her door. The hallway was empty. According to Sophie, the staff were all either serving the dinner or stationed in the kitchen. This was it. She slipped out, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the thick runner carpet. She moved quickly, her pulse roaring in her ears. Every shadow seemed to move. Every distant clink of silverware sounded like an alarm. She reached the West Hall. It was dark, deserted. Sophie was right. The small, red lights on the camera lenses were dark. Offline. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. At the end of the hall were the double doors to Liam's private office. She tried the handle. Locked. Panic surged. She hadn't thought of that. Of course it was locked. Then she remembered. Sophie's last, hurried whisper. The spare key. It's in the vase. The ugly Chinese one on the pedestal. She looked around wildly. There it was. A large, blue and white porcelain vase. Her fingers trembled as she reached inside, through the dry, dusty interior. Her fingertips brushed against cold, jagged metal. She grabbed it. With a shaking hand, she slid the key into the lock. Turned with a soft, definitive click. She was in. The office was dark, lit only by the moonlight streaming through the massive window. It smelled like him, leather, whiskey, and clean, crisp linen. Felt like a violation just being here. This was his sanctuary, the inner sanctum of his power. She moved quickly around the desk, her eyes scanning the drawers. Which one? Sophie had said the bottom drawer. She yanked it open. It was filled with files, stationery, and there, a simple, polished wooden box. She lifted it. It was heavy. This was it. Her ticket to freedom. She pried open the lid. It wasn't full of loose bills as she'd imagined. It was neat stacks of $100 bills, bound with paper bands. More money than she had ever seen in one place. Thousands of dollars. A wave of guilt so powerful it made her dizzy washed over her. This was stealing. This was wrong. But then the baby kicked. A sharp, insistent reminder of why she had to do this. For her child. For their future. She grabbed a handful of the stacks, shoving them into the deep pockets of her dark cardigan. She didn't take it all. Just enough. She closed the box, shut the drawer, and stood up, her heart hammering. She had to get out. Now. She turned to leave and her hip bumped the desk. The mouse for his computer jiggled, and the large monitor flickered to life. She meant to ignore it, to run, but the image on the screen froze her in her tracks. It wasn't a spreadsheet or a financial report. It was a security camera feed, and it was a live view of her room. Her empty room. Her blood ran cold. He was watching her. He had a camera in her room. But that wasn't the worst part. On the screen, a menu was open. It was a log of accessed files. And one file name was highlighted. Vance, Elara, pre-contract psychological evaluation. Her breath caught. He was looking at her file. Why? Why now? Driven by a new, chilling fear, she leaned closer. She could see part of the report on the screen. Subject displays a pronounced savior complex. likely stemming from her family's financial instability and her father's chronic illness. This makes her highly susceptible to emotional manipulation and forms of attachment. She will likely develop strong feelings for any figure of authority who shows her kindness, mistaking basic decency for deeper emotional connection. This is a significant risk factor for post-relinquishment attachment. The words were a punch to the gut. They had picked her not in spite of her vulnerability, but because of it. They had profiled her. They knew she would get attached. They had counted on it to keep her compliant. The kindness he had shown her in the sunroom, was it even real? Or was it just another part of the manipulation, a way to manage his asset? A hot, humiliated tear traced a path down her cheek. She had been a fool, a naive, predictable fool. The sound of laughter and clapping echoed from down the hall. The dinner was winding down. He would be back soon. She wiped her face, her resolve hardening into something cold and sharp. There was no guilt anymore, only a burning, furious need to escape. She turned off the monitor, slipped out of the office, locked the door, and returned the key to the vase. She moved like a ghost back to her room, the stolen money a heavy, guilty, and now righteous weight in her pockets. She had a phone. She had money. She had a plan. And she had just seen the true face of the man who held her captive. The man who had studied her weaknesses like a blueprint. He thought he knew her. He thought he could predict her. He was about to find out how wrong he was. The money felt like a lead weight sewn into the lining of her suitcase. Elara had packed a single, small bag with the barest essentials, a few changes of clothes, the ultrasound photo, the prepaid phone, and the stolen cash. It sat in the back of her closet, a silent promise of escape. Every time she looked at it, her stomach twisted with a mixture of hope and sheer terror. The psychological report had changed everything. The fragile connection she'd felt with Liam, the pity, the fleeting moments of something that felt almost like understanding. It had all been incinerated, leaving behind the cold, hard truth. She was a lab rat in a gilded maze, and he was the scientist observing her every predictable move. Her savior complex. The phrase echoed in her mind. A taunt. He had seen her coming from a mile away. She couldn't run yet. The dinner party had ended, but the estate was still on high alert. Liam was working from home for a few days, a rare occurrence that felt like a personal prison sentence. His presence was a constant, low hum of danger. She avoided the main rooms, sticking to her suite and the walled garden, her senses on a razor's edge, waiting for the axe to fall. Had he noticed the missing money? Had a camera she didn't know about caught her? 3 days after the theft, a storm rolled in from the ocean. It was a violent, magnificent thing, hurling rain against the glass walls of the estate like handfuls of gravel. The power flickered, and a tense quiet fell over the house as the backup generators thrummed to life. It was in this charged atmosphere that the crisis came, but not the one she expected. She was in her room trying to read, when she heard the raised voices. They came from the direction of the main foyer. Liam's voice, cold and sharp, and another, younger, desperate voice she didn't recognize. Curiosity, a dangerous but irresistible impulse, pulled her from her room. She crept to the top of the grand staircase and peered down. Liam stood like a dark statue, facing a young man soaked to the bone, his cheap suit clinging to his thin frame. He couldn't have been much older than Elara. A simple mistake, Mr. Black, I swear. The transfer was mislabeled at the central office. I was just the messenger. Your mistake. Liam's voice cut through the young man's plea like a whip. Cost my company $3 million and 72 hours of downtime. Do you know what 72 hours is worth, boy? I'm sorry, sir. Please, they'll fire me. My wife. She's pregnant. Liam didn't even flinch. Then you should have been more careful. Security, escort him out. And make sure his company knows he is never to set foot near any of my holdings again. The finality in his voice was absolute. The young man looked utterly broken, his shoulders slumping as 2 large security guards moved toward him. He was going to lose his job. His pregnant wife would suffer, all because of a mistake. Elara watched, her heart pounding with a sickening familiar. Ty. This was Liam Black unmasked. This was the man who saw people as disposable, their lives as insignificant numbers on a balance sheet. This was the man who saw her not as a person, but as a subject with a savior complex. Without thinking, driven by a fury that overrode her fear, she started down the stairs. Stop! The word was quiet, but it echoed in the vast foyer. Everyone froze. Liam turned slowly, his eyes widening in sheer disbelief as he saw her descending the staircase. The security guards hesitated. Elara. Liam's voice was a low warning. Go back to your room. She ignored him, walking until she stood between him and the terrified young man. She looked directly at Liam, her chin held high, though her knees felt like water. His wife is pregnant, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He made a mistake. Haven't you ever made a mistake? A muscle ticked in Liam's jaw. His gaze was a physical force, trying to push her back, to intimidate her into submission. She had never defied him before. No one defied him. This is not your concern, he said, each word dripping with ice. Everything that happens in this house is my concern, she fired back, the stolen money in her suitcase giving her a bizarre, borrowed courage. You brought me here. You made it my concern. You can't just destroy people because you have the power to. The silence in the foyer was deafening, broken only by the howl of the wind outside. The young man stared at her as if she were an angel who had fallen from the stormy sky. The security guards looked at Liam, waiting for the order to remove them both. Liam took a step toward her, his eyes burning with a dark, unreadable emotion. He was so close she could see the flecks of silver in his stormy irises. He was trying to dominate her, to force her to back down with the sheer force of his presence. She didn't move. For a long, tense moment, they stood locked in a silent battle of wills. The billionaire and the surrogate. The captor and the captive. Then, something in his face shifted. The anger didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else. Shock, and a flicker of what looked like respect. He turned his head, his gaze still locked on hers, and spoke to the security guards without looking at them. Get him a towel and a car. See that he gets home dry. The guards, looking confused, immediately released the young man. The man stammered his thanks, his eyes wide with shock and gratitude, first at Liam, then at Elara. Liam's attention never wavered from her. You, he said, his voice low and dangerously soft. My study. Now. He turned and strode away, expecting her to follow. The young man was led away safe. She had won. But as she followed Liam's retreating back, her brief courage evaporated, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. She had just challenged the king in his own castle, and now she was being summoned to the throne room for judgment. The walk to his study was the longest of her life. The storm raged outside, matching the tempest in her chest. Every logical part of her brain screamed that she had made a catastrophic error. She had drawn a line in the sand, and now she was about to be buried on the wrong side of it. He held the door open for her, a mockery of chivalry. She walked past him, the air crackling with his suppressed fury. The door clicked shut behind them, a sound as final as a coffin lid. He didn't go to his desk. He prowled the room, a caged predator, finally stopping by the window to watch the storm. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on her. Who are you? He asked, his voice deceptively quiet. The question threw her. You know who I am. He turned, his eyes blazing. No, I don't. I know a file. I know a girl from Ohio with a desperate family and a predictable psychological profile. That girl would not have done what you just did. That girl is meek. That girl is grateful. That girl knows her place. He took a step toward her. So I ask you again. Who are you? The reference to the file was a slap. Confirmed everything. All her doubts, all her fears. He had been playing a game with her from the start. Anger, hot and sharp, rose up to meet her fear. Maybe your file is wrong. Or maybe you just don't like it when your lab rat bites. A dark, incredulous smile touched his lips. A lab rat? Is that what you think this is? Isn't it? She shot back, her voice trembling with rage. You picked me because I was vulnerable. You knew I'd get attached. You've been watching me, studying me, manipulating me. The kindness in the sunroom, was that in the file too? A recommended strategy for asset management. His smile vanished. He looked struck. For a fraction of a second, he seemed genuinely thrown. You saw the report. I saw enough. He closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. That report is a cold, clinical document written by a man who reduces human beings to data points. It doesn't know you. It doesn't know the girl who defends strangers in my foyer. It doesn't know the woman who isn't afraid to look me in the eye and call me a monster. His words were fierce, his gaze intense, searching her face as if seeing her for the very first time. The air between them was thick, charged with a dangerous electric energy. The memory of their kiss in this very library hung between them, a ghost they could both feel. Why did you do it? He demanded, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. Why risk my wrath for someone you don't even know? Because it was the right thing to do, she cried, tears of frustration and fear finally welling in her eyes. Because someone had to. Because you have all the power in the world and you use it to crush people. And it's wrong. Right? Wrong. He let out a short, harsh laugh. You live in a fairy tale. In the real world, there are only consequences. And you, Elara Vance, have just invited them. He reached out, but not to hurt her. His hand came up, and his thumb brushed away a single tear that had escaped down her cheek. The touch was startlingly gentle, a stark contrast to the fury in his eyes. It sent a shiver through her entire body. You feel everything so deeply, don't you? He murmured, his thumb tracing a slow, hypnotic path along her cheekbone. It's your greatest weakness, and your greatest strength. Her breath hitched. She was trapped, caught between his anger and this terrifying, unexpected tenderness. She couldn't think. She could only feel the heat of his hand, the storm in his eyes, the frantic beating of her own heart. Don't, she whispered, but it was a weak protest. Don't what? He challenged, his face inches from hers. Don't see you? Don't touch you? You walked into the lion's den, Elara. You can't be surprised when the lion notices you. His other hand came up to cradle her face. He was holding her now, his grip firm but not painful. She was surrounded by him, his scent, his power, his confusing, contradictory rage and fascination. Tell me the truth, he commanded, his voice low and intent. Look me in the eye and tell me you feel nothing. Tell me that night in the library meant nothing. Tell me you're just the girl from the file, and I will walk away right now. She opened her mouth to lie, to say the words that would save her. But she couldn't. The lie wouldn't come. The truth was a living, breathing thing between them, as real as the child in her womb. She saw the moment he recognized it in her eyes. A dark triumph flared in his gaze. He had his answer. He leaned in, his lips a breath from hers. This wasn't like the first, blurry kiss. This was deliberate, acclaiming. But before he could close the final distance, a firm, rhythmic kick landed squarely against the inside of her belly, so strong it made her gasp and stumble back a step. His hands flew to her arms to steady her, his expression shifting from predatory intensity to sudden, sharp concern. What is it? Are you unwell? And in that moment of distraction, of primal physical connection to the baby, the truth hovered on her lips. It's the baby. Your baby. It's moving. It was the perfect moment. The charged atmosphere, his unexpected vulnerability, his hands on her arms. She could have told him. She could have ended the lie. But she looked into his eyes, and she saw the billionaire again. The man who crushed young men for making mistakes. The man who had her psychologically profiled. The man who owned her. If she told him the truth now, he wouldn't see it as a miracle. He would see it as the ultimate betrayal. He would see it as her trying to trap him. He would take the child and he would destroy her. The moment passed. It's nothing, she stammered, pulling away from his grasp, her arms wrapping protectively around her stomach. Just a cramp. From the stress. His eyes narrowed, searching her face. The concern faded, replaced by a flicker of suspicion. The connection was broken. The lion was back on guard. "Of course," he said, his voice cooling, becoming formal once more. "The stress. You should rest. We will discuss your little performance in the foyer another time." He was dismissing her. She had been granted a temporary reprieve, but the war was far from over. She had seen a crack in his armor, and he had seen a fire in her soul he hadn't expected. But she had also seen the monster lurking beneath, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had to get away from him before he discovered her secret. The escape was no longer just a desire. It was a necessity, and it had to happen soon. The storm passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and brutally bright. The estate felt different. The air was still watchful. Liam's presence was a constant, humming tension in the house. He didn't summon her again, but she felt his gaze. During her walks, she'd sometimes look up to see him standing at his office window, a dark silhouette against the glass, just watching. The confrontation in his study had changed the rules. He was no longer dealing with a predictable surrogate. He was dealing with a woman who had defied him, and a man of his power would not let that stand. He was trying to figure her out, and every second he spent doing that was a second he was getting closer to the truth. The baby felt her anxiety. The movements were stronger now, more frequent, little rolls and jabs that were impossible to ignore. She lived in constant fear that Liam would walk in while her hand was pressed to her stomach, her face soft with a love she was supposed to feel for a stranger's embryo, not for his living, kicking child. 3 days after the storm, her chance came. She was in the garden, the prepaid phone a secret, burning weight in her pocket. Sophie had managed to slip her a note with the number of a discreet, long-distance car service that asked no questions. "The system upgrade is complete," Sophie had whispered, her face pale with fear. "But the head of security is taking a personal day tomorrow. His second-in-command is less thorough. It's your best chance. Maybe your only one. Tomorrow." The word was both a promise and a threat. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her escape bag open on the floor beside her. She had the money. She had the phone. She had a destination, a small, cash-only motel in a town 3 hours away that she'd found mentioned on a travel blog in the estate's limited internet library. It was a start, but doubt was a poison in her veins. Where would she go after that? How would she support herself and a baby? Liam Black had resources she couldn't even imagine. He could hire private investigators. He could freeze her bank accounts. He could ruin anyone who helped her. He would hunt her. The thought sent a cold shiver through her. He wouldn't stop. Not until he had his child back. The child he believed was his rightful, paid-for heir. A soft sound at her door made her freeze. It wasn't the click of a lock or the tread of a guard. It was something else. A faint, scraping sound. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was it him? Had he finally come? The door didn't open. Instead, a small, white envelope slid silently underneath it. She waited, barely breathing, until she heard the soft footsteps retreating down the hall. She scrambled out of bed and snatched the envelope. There was no name on it. Inside was a single, thick card. An invitation. The annual Black Foundation Gala, it read. Blackwood Manor. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Blackwood Manor was his family's ancestral home, a 2-hour drive from the estate. He would be gone all day and most of the night. It was the perfect cover. The entire senior staff would be with him. The estate would be running on a skeleton crew. This wasn't a coincidence. It was an answer. A terrifying, perfect answer. But who had sent it? It wasn't Liam's style. He commanded, he didn't invite. Was it Mrs. Davies, giving her one last, silent chance to flee before her secret became too big to hide? Was it Sophie, orchestrating her escape with breathtaking boldness? It didn't matter. The path was being laid out for her. All she had to do was take it. The next day was the longest of her life. She moved through her routines like an automaton: breakfast, vitals check, a monitored walk. The staff were buzzing with the energy of the big event. Limousines were polished. Gowns were prepared. The air was thick with anticipation. Liam left at 4 in the afternoon. She watched from her window as his black Maybach, followed by 2 SUVs carrying his security and staff, glided down the long driveway and disappeared through the gates. The estate fell into a deep, unnatural quiet. The plan was simple. Wait until full dark. Use the phone to call the car to a service road a half-mile from the estate's perimeter. A location she'd pinpointed on. A map in the library. Slip out through the garden, cut through a wooded area to the back wall. There was a section, hidden by ivy, where the stones were loose. She'd found it weeks ago. A child's secret passage she'd never dreamed she would use. She counted the minutes, her bag at the ready. She changed into dark, comfortable clothes and running shoes. She was as ready as she would ever be. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of violet and orange, she made her final round of the room, ensuring she'd left nothing behind. Her eyes fell on the book where she'd hidden the ultrasound photo. She pulled it out. The grainy image of her baby, his baby, stared back at her. This was the only thing that mattered. This little, flickering life. A sudden, crushing wave of emotion overwhelmed her. This was goodbye. Goodbye to the beautiful prison. Goodbye to the wild garden. Goodbye to the confusing, infuriating, magnetic man who was the father of her child. She would never see him again. Her child would never know him. The grief was so sharp and unexpected it stole her breath. It wasn't love she felt for Liam Black. It was something more complicated. A tangled knot of fear, pity, anger, and a devastating, unwanted connection. She tucked the photo into her pocket right next to the phone. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. The clock on her bedside table read 7:55 p.m. The gala would be starting. Liam would be in a room full of the rich and powerful, completely unaware that his world was about to be upended. It was time. She took a deep, shuddering breath, shouldered her bag, and cracked open the door. The hallway was empty and dark. She moved like a shadow, her footsteps silent on the carpet. She reached the main floor and slipped through the side door that led to the gardens. The night air was cool and sweet. The only sound was the chirping of crickets and the distant, rhythmic crash of the waves. Freedom was so close she could taste it. She hurried down the gravel path, her eyes fixed on the dark line of the woods ahead. Just a few more minutes. Just through the trees, over the wall, and a powerful beam of light cut through the darkness, pinning her in its blinding glare. She froze, her heart seizing in her chest. "Going somewhere, Miss Vance?" The voice was calm, familiar, and utterly terrifying. It wasn't a security guard. As her eyes adjusted to the light, the figure holding the flashlight stepped forward. It was Arthur, Liam's lawyer, the shark, and standing beside him were 2 large men she'd never seen before. They hadn't all gone to the gala. It had been a trap. The invitation, the reduced staff. It was all a test. And she had failed. Arthur smiled. A cold, predatory sight. "Mr. Black had a feeling you might try something dramatic. He doesn't like it when his assets misbehave." One of the men moved toward her, his intentions clear. This was it. This was the end. He would take her back inside, lock her away, and when he found out she was pregnant with his real child, a primal maternal fury, fiercer than any fear, erupted inside her. She wasn't just an asset. She was a mother. As the man reached for her, she didn't scream. She didn't plead. She looked Arthur straight in the eye, her voice low and shaking with a rage she didn't know she possessed. "Touch me," she said, "and I will make sure Liam Black knows you harmed his child." Arthur's smile vanished. The man froze, his hand hovering in midair. The lawyer's eyes dropped to her stomach, then flew back to her face, wide with dawning, horrified comprehension. He knew the official timeline. He knew what her words meant. The game was over, and a new, much more dangerous one had just begun. The drive to Blackwood Manor was a silent, nightmarish journey. Elara sat wedged between the 2 silent, hulking men in the back of a black SUV, Arthur in the front passenger seat. He hadn't stopped looking at his phone, his fingers flying over the screen, no doubt sending a flurry of panicked messages to his boss. No one touched her. Her words had built an invisible, electrified fence around her. Liam Black's child. The real one. She had played her last card, the only one that mattered. The lie was dead. The truth was out, and it was a weapon. The SUV didn't go to the grand, illuminated entrance of Blackwood Manor, where limousines were disgorging glittering guests. It swept around to the back, through a gated archway, and into a private, cobblestoned courtyard. The engine cut, and the silence was heavier than before. Arthur got out and opened her door. His face was a grim mask. "Come with me. Don't speak to anyone." She climbed out, her legs unsteady. The two bodyguards fell in behind her. A silent, menacing escort. They entered through a servant's entrance, moving through stark, stone corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced men who all had Liam's stormy eyes. The air smelled of old money and older dust. They reached a set of heavy, carved wooden doors. Arthur knocked once, a sharp, respectful tap. "Enter." The voice from the other side was Liam's, but it was a sound she had never heard from him before. It was stripped of all pretense, all polish. It was pure, cold fury. Arthur opened the door and gently, but firmly, pushed her inside. The room was a library, but it made the one at the Solitude Estate look modern. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were crammed with leather-bound books. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, a low fire crackling within. And standing before it, his back to her, was Liam. He was still in his tuxedo, but his bow tie was undone and hanging loose around his neck. He held a glass of whiskey, his grip so tight his knuckles were white. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving them alone. For a long moment, the only sound was the spit and crackle of the fire. He didn't turn around. "Arthur informs me," he began, his voice dangerously quiet, "that you were attempting to abscond from my property with a significant amount of my cash, and that when confronted, you made a rather extraordinary claim." He finally turned. His face was pale, his eyes like chips of black ice. The controlled mask was gone, completely. This was the raw, unfiltered man beneath the billions. He was terrifying. "Is it true?" he asked. There was no point in lying. Not anymore. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze, pouring every ounce of her defiance into it. "Yes." The single word seemed to hang in the air, expanding to fill the entire room. He didn't move. He didn't blink. "Explain." The command was a whip crack. She told him. The whole story, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. The kiss in the library. The shock. The positive test. The terror. Her decision to hide it, to pretend it was the IVF baby. She told him about the stolen money, the prepaid phone, the desperate plan to run. "I did it to protect my child," she finished, her voice trembling but clear. "From you." He listened in utter silence, his expression unreadable. When she was done, he slowly placed his glass on the mantelpiece. Then he began to pace, a predator circling its prey. "Protect it from me?" he repeated, a low, venomous laugh escaping him. "You, a girl I plucked from obscurity, who I have housed, fed, and paid a fortune, decided to steal my biological child and run because you thought you needed to protect it?" "Yes," she cried, her own anger flaring. "Because I've seen what you do to people. That man in the foyer. You were going to destroy his life over a mistake. What would you do to me for a betrayal like this? You would take my baby and throw me out. You see people as things to be used." He stopped pacing and was in front of her in an instant, looming over her. "I see contracts," he roared, the sound echoing off the bookshelves. "I see agreements. I see a business arrangement that you corrupted with your sentimentality." "It wasn't sentimentality," she shouted back, tears of rage and fear streaming down her face. "It was a mistake, a human mistake. Something your precious file probably said I was too weak to avoid." His hand shot out so fast she flinched, but he didn't touch her. He slammed his palm against the bookshelf next to her head, making the whole structure shudder. "Don't you dare!" he snarled, his face inches from hers. "Don't you dare pretend this was some tragic accident. You hid this from me for months. You lied to my face. You stole from me. You were going to disappear with my heir." "Heir?" She laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "Is that all you see? An heir? This isn't a business transaction anymore. Liam, this is your son. Or your daughter. A person. That changes nothing," he thundered. "You have no rights here. You signed them all away. That child is mine." The words were a death knell. The final, brutal truth. He didn't care about the how or the why. He only cared about the what. He saw the baby as his property, his asset. All the fight drained out of her. The anger, the defiance, it vanished, leaving behind a hollow, crushing despair. She sank to her knees on the Persian rug, sobs racking her body. She had lost. He would take her baby. She would never hold her child, never see it grow. She was broken. She felt his shadow fall over her. He was standing there watching her crumble. The silence stretched, broken only by her ragged sobs and the crackling fire. Then, a strange thing happened. He knelt down in front of her. His hand, the one that had just slammed into the bookshelf, came up, hesitant, and his fingers gently brushed the tears from her cheek. The touch was so at odds with his fury that it made her look up. The raw anger was still in his eyes, but it was now mixed with something else. Something confused. Something lost. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice rough. She looked. She had nothing left to lose. "I read the report," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I knew you would get attached to the pregnancy. I expected it. I planned for it. It was a variable I could control." His thumb stroked her cheek again, a gesture that was both possessive and strangely tender. "But this fire, this defiance, this absolute, maddening willingness to burn your entire world to the ground for what you believe is right." He trailed off, his stormy eyes searching her face as if the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life was written there. "That wasn't in the file," he whispered. He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was warm on her skin. She could feel the frantic beat of his heart, or maybe it was her own. They were locked in their own private storm, kneeling on the floor of his ancestral home, surrounded by the ghosts of his family. "Elara," he murmured, her name a prayer and a curse on his lips. The door to the library burst open. Arthur stood there, his face ashen. "Liam, I'm sorry to interrupt, but—" He stopped, his eyes widening at the scene before him. Liam didn't move. "What is it, Arthur?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "It's the press," Arthur stammered. "Someone tipped them off. They're running a story tomorrow. The headline," he swallowed hard. "The headline is Billionaire Black's Virgin Surrogate Scandal. They have everything. The contract, the payments, and a source claiming the baby isn't from the IVF. They're calling it exploitation. They're calling it a kidnapping." The world stopped. Liam slowly pulled away from Elara, rising to his feet. The moment of terrifying vulnerability was gone, replaced by the cold, hard face of the businessman, the king. He looked from Arthur's panicked face down to Elara, still kneeling on the floor. His eyes narrowed. "Who did you tell?" he asked, his voice like ice. The world tilted. "The press? A scandal?" Elara stared up at Liam, her mind reeling. "I didn't tell anyone," she whispered, the words raw. "Who would I tell?" But Liam wasn't looking at her with confusion. He was looking at her with a dawning, chilling certainty. The brief connection they had shared moments before evaporated, replaced by a colder, harder reality. "Of course you didn't," he said, his voice flat. He turned to Arthur. "Get a team on it. I want to know the source. I want to know what they have, and I want it buried before the sun comes up. Use whatever means necessary." Arthur nodded, already pulling out his phone, and backed out of the room, closing the door softly, leaving them in the tense silence. Liam paced away from her, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it. This isn't a coincidence. You try to run, and hours later, a story breaks that could destroy my reputation and my company's stock value. He stopped and pinned her with a glare. This was your plan B, wasn't it? If you couldn't get away, you'd ruin me. The accusation was so unfair, so monstrous. It stole the air from her lungs. No, how can you think that? I was running from you. Why would I want your attention? Leverage, he shot back, his eyes glinting with a cynical fire. You couldn't get away with my child, so you decided to hold my public image hostage. A classic move. I'm almost impressed. He thought she was a master manipulator, a schemer. He was crediting her with a cunning she didn't possess. The girl from the file was gone, and in her place he saw a rival, an enemy. I didn't do this, she said, pushing herself to her feet, her body aching with exhaustion and despair. Then who did? He demanded, sweeping his arm out. The maid? The butler? The story details the private contract, Elara. The financial terms, the virgin clause, that only leaves one other person who had access to that information and a motive to leak it. You. He was building a case against her in his mind, brick by unassailable brick. Her defiance, her theft, her secret pregnancy. It all painted a picture of a calculated betrayal. Before she could form another denial, his personal phone, which he had tossed onto a side table, buzzed insistently. He snatched it up, his face growing darker with every second he listened. When? He barked into the phone. A pause. And the board? I see. He listened for another moment, his jaw so tight she thought it might snap. No. Do not release a statement. I'll handle this myself. He ended the call and looked at her, a strange, calm finality settling over his features. It was more frightening than his rage. It seems the story dropped early. It's already trending online. My board is in a panic. My PR team is having aneurysms. He took a step toward her. You wanted to change my life, Elara? Congratulations. You have. He moved to the door and opened it. The two bodyguards were still there. Take her to the sunroom on the east wing. Lock the door. No one goes in or out. Not even Mrs. Davies. Liam, please, she begged, as the guards moved toward her. You have to believe me. He gave her one last, long look. His eyes filled with a bitter, profound disappointment that cut deeper than any anger. Belief is a luxury I can no longer afford, he said quietly. You made sure of that. The guards took her arms, their grip firm but not cruel, and led her away. She didn't fight them. What was the point? She was trapped in a nightmare of his making, accused of a crime she didn't commit, carrying a child he now saw as a weapon used against him. They led her to a beautiful, glass-walled room overlooking the manicured gardens of Blackwood Manor. It was even more opulent than the one at Solitude. They guided her to a plush chaise lounge and then left, the key turning in the lock with a sound of terrible finality. She was a prisoner again, but this time the bars were invisible and the charges against her were public. She curled up on the chaise, wrapping her arms around her stomach, feeling the baby move restlessly. She had never felt more alone. The man she had, against all odds, started to feel a dangerous connection to, now saw her as his greatest enemy. Hours passed. The sky outside the glass walls lightened from black to deep blue, then to the pale gray of dawn. She must have dozed off, because the sound of the key turning in the lock jolted her awake. It was Liam. He looked like he hadn't slept. He was still in his tuxedo pants and the untucked, white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up. He held a tablet in his hand. His expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed blank slate. He didn't speak. He simply walked over and handed her the tablet. On the screen was a news article. The headline was brutal. Black's baby. Billionaire's surrogate scandal rocks Wall Street. There were pictures. One of Liam, looking cold and ruthless. One of her, a grainy photo from her college ID, where she looked young and innocent. And in the center of the article, a quote from an anonymous source close to the situation. The words made her blood run cold. Mr. Black specifically sought a vulnerable, financially desperate young woman with no sexual history. He manipulated her into a private arrangement, and when a natural pregnancy occurred from a moment of weakness, he attempted to force her to relinquish the child as per the original contract, ignoring the profound emotional and ethical implications. He sees the baby as property, not as a person. Every word was a twisted version of the truth, designed to paint Liam as a monster and her as his victim. It was her deepest fear, the story she had told herself, now blasted across the internet for the world to see. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with horror. "I didn't say this. I would never." "I know," he said quietly. The two words were so simple, so unexpected. They completely disarmed her. She stared at him, speechless. "The language is too perfect," he continued, his voice tired. "Too legally precise. Profound emotional and ethical implications. That's not you. That's a lawyer. My lawyer." Understanding dawned, slow and sickening. "Arthur." Liam gave a short, grim nod. He was the only other person with full access to the contract and the details of your situation. He was also the one who found you for me. He presented your file. He recommended you specifically. "But why?" Elara breathed. "Power," Liam said, the word laced with a lifetime of dealing with betrayals. "He's been my right-hand man for a decade. He knows where all the bodies are buried. But he's always been the number two. With this scandal, my board would lose confidence. My reputation would be damaged. He probably thought he could leverage the chaos to force me out, or to secure a more powerful position for himself. He used you as the bomb to blow a hole in my empire." He walked to the window, looking out at the rising sun. "He underestimated two things." "What?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "First, he underestimated how much I hate being manipulated." Liam's tone was lethally soft. "And second, he underestimated you." He turned to face her. The early morning light carved out the sharp lines of his face. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear and focused. "He thought you were just a girl from a file, a pawn. He didn't count on you having a will of your own. He didn't count on you fighting back. Your attempt to run forced his hand. He had to leak the story early, before I found out you were gone and started asking questions that would lead back to him. It was sloppy. And in my business, sloppy is fatal." He came and sat on the edge of the chaise opposite her. He didn't touch her, but his presence filled the space. "They're calling for my head, Elara. The press, the board, the public. They see a predatory billionaire and a helpless surrogate. That's the story he sold them." He leaned forward, his intense gaze holding hers. "There's only one way out of this. Only one way to save my company and secure our child's future." She knew what he was going to say before he said it. The pieces clicked into place with a terrible, inevitable logic. "We have to change the narrative," he said. "We have to give them a new story." He reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, firm. It wasn't a request. It was a proposal. "Marry me." The two words hung in the air between them, more shocking than any threat or accusation. "Marry me." Elara stared at him, her mind reeling. The man who had called her a liar, a thief, and a pawn now held her hand, his offer feeling like both a life raft and a set of chains. "It wouldn't be real," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It would be the most real thing in this room," Liam countered, his gaze intense. "It's a business merger, partnership, for our child. You give me my heir, legitimated and beyond reproach. You give the public a love story instead of a scandal. In return, you get my name, my protection, my resources. You will never want for anything. Neither will our child." "A partnership?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "You just had me locked in a room, and I'm unlocking the door," he said, his voice low and earnest. "But the world outside that door is a jungle, Elara. Arthur planted a story that makes you a victim and me a monster. Alone, you will be hounded, picked apart, and crushed by the media. Your family will be dragged into it. Our child will be a headline for the rest of their life. Together, we can control the narrative. We can build a fortress around our family. Our family. The words were a seismic shift. He wasn't just talking about the baby anymore. He was including her. She looked down at their joined hands. His was so much larger, capable of wielding immense power, both for creation and destruction. She thought of the baby, of giving it a life of not just wealth, but of legitimacy and safety. She thought of her own parents, finally secure beyond their wildest dreams. But she also thought of herself. Would she be trading one gilded cage for another? Becoming Mrs. Liam Black, the ultimate asset? She looked up, meeting his stormy eyes. What would I be? A prisoner with a prettier title. You would be my wife, he said, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his own armor, a flicker of something vulnerable and raw. You would be the mother of my child. You would have a seat at the table. Your fire, your defiance. I don't want to extinguish it, Elara. I need it. I spent my life building walls. You saw the crack in them. You saw the garden. Her breath caught. He was offering her a share of his power, not just his wealth. He was acknowledging that she had changed him. It wasn't a proposal of love. It was a proposal of respect, of mutual survival, of a shared future built on the ruins of their betrayal. Slowly, she pulled her hand from his. He flinched almost imperceptibly, thinking she was refusing. Then, she placed her hand on her stomach, where their child was growing. She took a deep, shuddering breath, making the most important decision of her life. The answer is yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. But on one condition. His eyes narrowed, the businessman instantly on alert. What condition? No more cages, she said, holding his gaze. No more watching me through cameras. No more files. We do this as partners or we don't do it at all. The girl from the file is gone. You're marrying the woman in front of you. A long, silent moment passed. The fate of billions, of reputations, of a future family, hung in the balance. A slow, genuine smile, the first real one she had ever seen from him, touched Liam Black's lips. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges, revealing the man he could have been, the man he might still become. Deal, he said. The wedding was the society event of the decade. Held at Solitude, it was a masterpiece of public relations. The world saw a radiant, pregnant Elara in a breathtaking gown, and a fiercely protective Liam, his love for her seeming to shine from his eyes. The scandal was rebranded as a secret whirlwind romance. The virgin surrogate story was buried under a tidal wave of their epic love story. In a quiet, private meeting the day before the wedding, Liam handed Elara a file. It contained evidence of Arthur's embezzlement, hidden for years. With a single, well-placed call from Elara's new, untraceable phone, a wedding gift from her husband, the information was leaked. Arthur didn't just lose his job, he faced federal charges. His downfall was swift, absolute, and a silent message to anyone who would ever cross the Black family. 9 months after the garden confrontation, Elara gave birth to a healthy baby girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's determined spirit. They named her Rose, after the wild, untamed garden where everything had begun to change. Liam was there, holding Elara's hand, his usual composure shattered by the overwhelming wave of emotion. When the nurse placed the tiny, swaddled baby in his arms, he looked not like a billionaire claiming his heir, but like a father seeing a miracle. He looked at Elara, tears he made no effort to hide shining in his eyes. "She's perfect," he whispered. In that moment, the last of Elara's walls crumbled. They didn't live happily ever after in the fairy tale sense. They fought. He could still be ruthless and controlling. She could still be stubborn and defiant. The ghosts of his past and the insecurities of hers sometimes surfaced in the dead of night. But they built a life, a real one. Liam learned to lower his guard, to trust, to be a father and a husband, not just a CEO. Elara learned to wield her new influence with compassion, founding a charity for struggling families that became her life's work, funded by the Black fortune. The virgin surrogate had indeed changed the billionaire's life forever. She hadn't just given him a child. She had forced him to open his heart. She had shown him that the greatest fortune wasn't measured in dollars, but in trust, in family, and in the wild, unexpected, and powerful strength of love. One evening, years later, they were in the walled garden. Rose, now a toddler, was chasing fireflies, her laughter echoing in the twilight. Liam stood behind Elara, his arms wrapped around her, his chin resting on her head. "She has your smile," he murmured. Elara leaned back into his embrace, watching their daughter. "She has your stubbornness." He chuckled, a warm, rich sound that had become the soundtrack of her life. He turned her to face him, his expression serious. "Marrying you was the best business decision I ever made," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "And saying yes," she replied softly, "was the greatest leap of faith I ever took." And in the quiet of the garden, surrounded by the whispering roses and the sound of their daughter's joy, they both knew it was the truth.